Why don't we go ahead and get started and let people catch up as they arrive. This is the Treading Where Officials Can't Go session, kind of talking a little bit about the role brigades and other civic organizations can play in highly fragmented systems like the criminal legal system. And the talk is going to be roughly in two parts, and then we'll open to questions and discussion. Hannah's going to talk about kind of the context for this from inside the justice system, and then I'll kind of take more of the Code for Asheville outside perspective. Hannah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Ledgerton. I work with Buncombe County's Justice Services Department. My title now is I'm the Youth Justice Division Manager, supporting youth justice-related initiatives, but joined the department formally in July of 2020 as the Safety and Justice Challenge Grant Manager.
And my name is Eric Jackson. I am a former co-organizer of Code for Asheville, current member, and it is Code for Asheville's fault that I am now the manager of the Office of Data and Performance with the City of Asheville. So I kind of am in a dual role there. And I bridge over into Hannah's world in two ways. One, and we'll be talking about the Safety and Justice Challenge, or Hannah will in a moment. But I'm on one of the working groups, the Community Engagement Work Group for the Safety and Justice Challenge. And the invisible bullet in there is that my wife is a public defender in the system with her position is funded by the Safety and Justice Challenge. So that this stuff comes at me like all day, every day from all directions.
So we wanted to give you a little bit of a grounding in where we are. We are in Buncombe County in North Carolina in the western part of the state, located in downtown Asheville in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The county is a mixture of urban and rural. We've got Asheville is the urban center for western North Carolina, surrounded by more rural parts of the county. That overall, our county is about 270,000, predominantly white, close to 80%. At this point, about a 6% Black population and a smaller Native American Indian population. And our Hispanic Latinx population is counted at around 8%. And in the city of Asheville, closer to 95,000, with a slightly more concentration of our Black community, around 10% of the city, and similar numbers for the Native and Hispanic Latinx population. And like many communities across the country, we are working on trying to reduce over-incarceration in our community. The Safety and Justice Challenge is a national initiative funded by the MacArthur Foundation, aimed at changing the way that communities think about and use jails, with the goals of reducing over-incarceration, advancing racial equity, and authentic community engagement. Buncombe County became an implementation site in 2018 when we were awarded $1.75 million with the goal of originally trying to safely reduce our jail population by 15%, and the goal of reducing disparities for our BIPOC community as well. One of the reasons that led Buncombe County, in addition to kind of aiming for increases in the way that, or changes in the way that we use our jail system and advancing racial equity, one of the key drivers in our community for doing this work, that from a fiscal standpoint, is also recognition that our jail has been near capacity, especially when we entered the Safety and Justice Challenge. And our county officials are in support of us not building or expanding a new jail, and recognizing that in order to do that, we need to bring many partners together to try to change the way that we do things in our community. I think you can, oh, here we go. So the first few years of the grant, our original goal was to safely reduce the jail population by 15%. The COVID pandemic has had an interesting impact on justice system reforms across the country. And a lot of, and in many ways, it accelerated many of the reforms that folks in the justice reform community were advocating for. There was a lot of resistance in some ways to putting some systemic reforms into place that could safely reduce the jail population. And then COVID-19 hit, and all of a sudden there was massive coordinated comprehensive support from actors across our community and different entry points and points and throughout the system that were working in a coordinated fashion to try to safely reduce the jail population with a consistent message and a consistent goal that people should not be sent to jail unless there was a significant threat to public safety. So because of that, during the first 4 months of the pandemic, we safely reduced our jail population by 42%. We've been able to look at the recidivism rates of those who were in the system through March through August of 2020, and we did not see an increase in recidivism rates for those who were released during that time period. And in fact, there was a slight decrease in recidivism rates from folks during that time. You can go to the next slide. Unfortunately, it's not been all good news from there. Many of the systemic reforms and efforts that were put into place in the beginning of the pandemic were, as things started to reopen a little bit, we saw a slight increase in our jail population. And I will say from about October of 2020 through April, May of last year, 2021, for about 10 months, we were able to sustain a jail population that was around that original goal of a 15% reduction. And so that did seem like something that could potentially be sustainable if we had continued coordinated support. Unfortunately, since June and July of 2021, we have seen uptick in our jail population again, and it has gone, it's almost unfortunately back towards where we started when we started this initiative. One other complex but key thing to note is that even when we reduced our jail population during the start of the pandemic, we did not reduce our inequity in our jail population. And in fact, the percentage of our, the overrepresentation of our Black community in the jail increased to about the high of 33% in July of 2020 when we reached the lowest point of the jail population. In January, I should have a more recent data point, but in January of 2022, our jail was about 28% Black, compared to, if you remember, about 6% of our Buncombe County population. You can go to the next slide, Eric. So one of the there's a couple of key drivers of disparities in our jail population. One of those that we're going to really focus in on today. Actually, Eric, could you go to the next slide and then I'll go back to that chart?
Sure.
So two of the drivers of inequities in our jail population that the Safety and Justice Challenge partners have been able to identify. One is that violent crime in our community is leading to longer pretrial incarceration, and there's a lot of complex factors that lead to the overrepresentation of folks in our jail that are charged, that are Black, that are charged with some more serious offenses, and even there's inequities in folks who are charged with more serious offenses and how long they stay in our jail. One of the ways that the Safety and Justice Challenge partners have been targeting this right now is to invest in more upstream community-led responses. There was a lot of desire from our community members that investment really be made into community-driven solutions. And so that's the direction we're going right now. And while there are some innovative practices across the country in changing some of the ways that the criminal legal system responds to more serious offenses, it's not an easy reform to, those are not easy reforms to always get buy-in on, and we are not there yet. The other key area that we're really going to focus in on today of drivers of inequities in our jail population is around failures to appear. And in 2018, for a number of reasons, having a failure to appear in court for a court date, so a missed court date, led to an order for arrest being issued. And for folks who were in our jail with a failure to appear charge, their booking increased the length of stay, or they had an increased length of stay by 79%. And the automatic processes for having a failure to appear charge in our state, unless the judge orders otherwise, it indicates that they're going to be held on a secure bond, and they're if they had a cash bail set, it was going to be doubled. One of the things across the country that has really shown an impact on individuals coming to court is having reliable and informative court notification systems. When implemented well across the country, court notification systems can reduce failure to appear rates by up to 25%. Eric, can you get back to the slide 8? So this has a couple of data trends we wanted to highlight for you. The bar graph shows the total population in our jail of folks who are being held on pretrial. And then the smaller number at the bottom that has kind of dotted lines around it, if you can see that small, is the actual number of folks who are in the jail for a failure to appear charge only. So they had charges and then they missed a court date. And so they didn't commit another charge or another offense, but they were arrested and brought into jail because they missed that court date. And then the blue line shows the percentage of the jail population that is with folks who are in there with an FTA charge only. So for many reasons during the pandemic, largely a lot of changes in how the courts were responding to people missing their court date. Both the courts were telling folks that they didn't have to come to many of the court dates that they otherwise would have, trying to reduce number of folks coming into the courthouse. And then judges issuing, having different thresholds for when they would actually issue that order for arrest if someone did miss a court date that they were expected to be at. Those changes led to about a year where our percentage of the jail population that was in on failure to appear only was significantly down. Unfortunately, that's back up to about 15% of our jail population right now. So Eric, now we can go ahead to court notifications. So with the identification of failure to appear as being a driver, both of our overall jail population and of inequities in our jail population, the Safety and Justice Challenge work groups, both community engagement and racial equity, were interested in trying to implement a court notification system that would meet the needs of better serving folks in our community. So in around a little bit before we really started working on this, the state was rolling out a North Carolina state court notification system. And so when Buncombe County reached out to try to ask about designing our own system, the state initially said no. They did end up agreeing to let our pretrial services department that access the data feed so that clients who are assigned by a judge to supervision by pretrial services department as a condition of their release, that those clients started to get access to a court notification system that was built off of the best practices of the type of information that should go into them and how frequently to remind folks to come to court. However, for folks who are not assigned to pretrial services, they didn't have access to that. And so, and for those of you outside of the court system or justice system, we don't want to be putting everyone onto pretrial services. We don't want folks to have more supervision than deemed necessary. We don't want to risk over supervising folks and over criminalizing folks for many things. With that in mind, Buncombe County tried to push out the North Carolina state system. However, there's a lot of challenges to accessing the state system, both for individuals in the community, as well as even individuals within the justice system. One strategy that can be really effective in having folks sign up for court notifications is if we can find a justice system actor who can go ahead and sign people up. Unfortunately, the North Carolina state system was such that you can't search by name. You have to know your charge, your individual case number. And so if someone has multiple charges, they might have, upwards of 7 or more case numbers for one incident. And so in order to effectively sign up for court notifications through that, they would need to know all of those and sign up for each of those case numbers individually. And it's hard to get justice system actors to buy into doing that work either, in addition to just the sheer challenges that community members faced in trying to access the system. As we have come out of the initial pandemic response and seen our jail population start to increase again, and particularly seeing that population of folks in on FTA charges increase again, we revisited the need to have an effective court notification system that people could actually sign up for and use. And I think that leads us to Code for Asheville.
Okay. So before we get into what Code for Asheville actually did, I want to talk, I think it's helpful in order to understand the challenges that Hannah was just talking about. I think it helps to understand more, how the criminal justice system actually works. And I think for most of us, you see in the paper, somebody was arrested, oh, good, they got the guy. My wife she's a public defender, she knows better, and she'll talk about, she has that same reaction. And then it kind of goes over into this black box where justice is somehow done. And if we think about it a little bit more, maybe we think, okay, yeah, there's a judge, there's some sort of prosecution and a defense, and the judge is in charge. I think most of us would tend to believe that there may be a bunch of actors, there's bailiffs, there's court reporters, and so on, but the judge is in charge, and these are the two main other actors, prosecution and defense. This is what the justice system actually looks like. There are a lot of different groups, and what's really exciting about the criminal legal system is that every single one of them is a fiefdom that is able to say no to a change. And it even breaks down. I haven't included, law enforcement, the police, the sheriff's department, the highway patrol. Some of these break out more, and among the judges, every judge is actually a fiefdom that is able to say no. And so with nobody actually in charge, other than in those few moments when the judge gets to say, somebody can or can't do something in the court, for the most part, it's really hard to get a change. So you get kind of these seemingly absurd things where the court system decides to do something that the court system then says no to, which is what happened here. And so if you look at it this way, it's kind of obvious why it's hard, whether it is a justice reform or even something as simple as getting a new technology. You cannot get all these people to agree to fund and implement a system. It's just really, really super challenging. So because I was hearing about this, kind of from two sides, my participation in the work group with the Safety and Justice Challenge, and also hearing about it every single night from my wife, it seemed like an interesting opportunity to kind of bring in the skills that Code for Asheville has. And we wanted to go in light. We wanted to do it the simplest possible way. And so our first attempt early in 2021 was we were just going to wrap the site. I won't subject you to the wonders of the state site, but because it's not by name, you have two separate pages that you have to go to look up cases and to sign up. You have to sign up for each one individually. And there were technical barriers that turned out to even trying to wrap them into one. We proudly showed the results to the work group and got it went from completely unusable to just really, really terrible. And of course, this is Code for America. This is a crowd that has a clue about terrible government technology services. So we thought, okay, this isn't going to work. We decided, we knew there were some solutions out there that other brigades had done. We figured we'd just adapt that. And it turned out that also was challenging. And we were still working around the things like CourtBot are still signing up for each individual case number. I think it's common for there to be 3 or 4. I have seen as many as 75 individual charges on a single person, and nobody's going to be able to sign up for all of those. So we went into phase 3, and between late last spring and the fall, it turned out to be much easier to just write it over. It's not like reminder systems are bleeding edge technology. And so we went ahead and did it. We launched it last November. When I checked yesterday, we had 50 current subscribers. We've sent out about 2,500 notifications to date. And just to this is the system. It's designed to be super simple. I'm not going to dwell on the technical, but you basically put in a name, last name is sufficient. You get a list of people. You click one to select, type in a phone number, submit, and you're there. And you can always unsubscribe by texting stop. What that does, it is by name. So you just look for the name, find the right person, and subscribe to that. We go out and update. We're scraping data from the state system to know when the court dates are. And we go out once a week for every client and update. So if court dates change, they get new charges. The case number can change because it moves from lower to upper court. So we capture all of that, which is something that the state system won't do. We went out immediately with 3 main languages here in Buncombe County: English, Spanish, and Russian. As you can see up there at the top right. You can switch back and forth, and that is the whole site as well as the text messages are in the different languages. And the messages themselves are configurable, and we're implementing what has been kind of determined to be best practice, which is mixing consequence messages, which we do about a week ahead, saying it's important you show up for court, or there could be, you could have an order for your arrest issued, along with, hey, don't forget to get childcare, or figure out your transportation and so on. And then, of course, we're being careful about privacy and so on. So that is out and running, and we have saved the day, or possibly not. And we did. I mean, one of the things that's been cool about this is we really did get a celebration. We got a celebration from the folks in the system, from Code for Asheville. We've got a lot of enthusiasm around this, and it's really satisfying, and it's great. But even though we've got some really enthusiastic people inside the system, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and so on, and including some of the folks at the jail. We've got a great partnership with the county's data analyst. We've set up an anonymized feed for him to be able to pull data so that we can start seeing if there's an impact from the court reminder system. We got QR codes up. Very beginning, we had QR codes up on the walls of the courtrooms. I don't know if they're still there. All of that is really great, but everyone's overwhelmed. It's like most government things. Nobody has any time to do anything extra. And since it's not actually built into systems, and as you can tell from that earlier picture of what the court system actually is, let me just say that finding any sort of standard process for doing anything in the system is rare, let alone something special like this. So, Hannah, why don't you talk a little bit about kind of some of the things we're doing to explore doing better?
So we have talked for a while about needing to really kind of roll out a bigger campaign. Through the Safety and Justice Challenge, we made court reminder cards a couple of years ago to try to encourage folks to sign up for the state system. But because it was so challenging, that wasn't as effective. So we talked about adapting the court reminder cards to share with defendants and their family members, and having those distributed across access points in the justice system. Talked about how to design the messaging in a way that it could go out more widely, like in local media or buses, as well as targeting posters and banners inside the courthouse, potentially having a sign-up kiosk in the courthouse. And we are working on piloting a court navigator program where we'd be able to have kind of a peer support individual, and ideally, eventually, individuals who could help be available in the courthouse and in the courtrooms for folks, just as kind of a peer support, as well as helping folks sign up for the court reminders and troubleshoot things that might be coming up in their lives that might be keeping them from coming to court. And one of the things, as we're trying to figure out what a more widespread campaign could look like, also trying to figure out the right language and messaging around not just if you have a court date signing up for this, but if you or a loved one have a court date signing up, so that potentially we can get folks who care about folks who have court dates can sign up for this as well, and help to get their loved ones to their court dates. Eric, do you want to go to the next one? And so, yeah, I think this is still, what role did Code for Asheville play here? So one of the benefits of partnering, from my experience from being within the government to partnering with Code for Asheville, is that they were able to help the project move forward to meet and respond to community needs without needing 100% buy-in from many of the justice system partners that were referenced. And explicitly, the county didn't have the ability, full permission to create our own system. And we didn't necessarily have the expertise in how to do that either. And so Code for Asheville had the expertise and ability to just to see what they could do first, to see if they could make it better, make it more usable, what was out there, and then when it wasn't meeting the needs of our community, to try to do something differently. And as a partner in that, we didn't have to take that on ourselves, but we could also, we weren't going to tell a community partner not to build something that might be a useful tool for our community members, and try to help overcome some problems that our community is facing. Additionally, they were able to help create something that I can already say, from even though the numbers are lower than we want, and to see having 50 current users, the report we used to get about the number of cases that were signed up. So case numbers alone, we get about maybe 20 a month sometimes. And remembering that 20 case numbers could be 3 people or more or less. And so we're hoping that, with already increased utilization, we're hoping we can really help to roll out some advertising and support to really help see if this can really make an impact. And because they're a community-based partner, there's not any sort of, I would say that we don't have any sort of concerns about who owns this. We were proud to be able to help and support a community partner, and there wasn't a competition or feeling of competitiveness around who owns this. We just really wanted to get a more usable system to meet our community's needs.
And I think so. One, I should point out a couple things, but one, because Buncombe County was told that they could not do this, it was helpful that Code for Asheville, the administrative office of the courts, state administrative office of the courts, can't order us around. And so we could just go do it. Buncombe County is paying for the infrastructure, but of course they didn't pay for the development. And they're not paying for the maintenance. Just to answer the question about privacy concerns, because that's foremost for me, all of that information, we're just pulling from the public website on the state side. I don't think it has the full birthday. I think it's the day, month, and day. But all the information we're using is being pulled from an already public site that the state maintains. So if you look at this in terms of the role, I think it's similar to what was happening a lot early on with Code for America and with the Code for America brigades, where it's a combination of showing what's possible, not so much here because everybody knew what was possible with reminder systems, but also being able, I remember Mark Head, who was the first chief data officer for the city of Philadelphia, used to talk about when they did their open data portal, that turned out to be the first time that 2 different departments in Philadelphia could get at each other's data, because doing it internally was essentially impossible. But once you got it on the open data portal, they could go and get each other's data. And so that's another case where getting all the stakeholder buy-in internally turned out to be much harder than putting it out there and letting somebody outside help do it. And then that means that we can, if Buncombe County wants to go have another conversation with the state, they can show numbers, of signups. They can show, hopefully, impact. They can show and we can do a user test and show complete failure on one system and ease on the other. And so I think we're allowing the proof of concept, even though it's pretty much a production system, it's essentially a proof of concept, because in the long term, this does need to be reabsorbed by the court system. The other role that I think is really important, and this is where I feel like at least I'm transitioning a bit, yay, we did this thing, and it's sort of up to the actors in the system to figure out how to integrate this into their own processes. That's not something Code for Asheville can help with. But if you go back and look at that map of all the actors in the system, I left one really critical player out in that earlier one. If you want to know kind of what drives the way the criminal legal system works, long term, that's driven by the narrative that's happening in the public, and the laws, what the politicians, their messaging, and then the response of law enforcement and the court system and so on is really long term being driven by public opinion and kind of public narratives. And so I think the other important role that those of us who have technology and data expertise can start to do, and this is kind of where I've started to transition in this project, is helping get some of the data out to the communities that allow that narrative to be changed. So I'm now, every morning, I'm scraping information from the jail website, just capturing information about who's in jail, what charges they're on, how long they stay, and so on. Not data that they don't have internal to the system, but again, because we're operating entirely independently and with completely public data, I don't need permission to start looking at that and start working with community groups and empowering them for their own advocacy. And I think that's the other important role, is becoming an enabler for folks in the community, advocacy groups, and so on, to use data to help drive change in the system long term. We've got some questions coming in, and please do, if you can, I'm going to throw this up. Feel free to reach out to us. Let's kind of transition to discussion and questions. If you would like, go ahead. I think at the top right, you can share your video and share your video and audio and just ask the question. But I see we have two in the chat. I will answer one and then I'll let Hannah do the other. I think getting stakeholders in the work comfortable with the idea that how do you get them comfortable that this is essentially a proof of concept and motivate them to move forward with maturing? We didn't. That's the advantage of being outside. We just built it. It turned out to be pretty easy to do, and so we just did it and said, hey, do you want to use it? What's critical is that somebody wants to use it. I would say I tried really hard to convey the idea that it's a proof of concept and it's not production, and those words just kind of fly over people's heads. And we found ourselves going from beta to full production in a day because one of the judges got very excited. Yeah, basically. Yeah. And the last thing we want to do is slap down a judge.
And I see, Daniel, your question about pathways to have this become an official court system offering and barriers and reasons that hold this back from happening. Honestly, so I work for the county's Justice Services Department. We're not an official court entity. We provide lots of diversion programs and case management support and house initiatives to try to advance justice system reforms and supports for folks who are moving through the system. However, we're not technically a part of the official court system, I would say, in some ways, as far as we're not under the North Carolina Administrative Office of the Courts. However, the county, before my time, some of my colleagues were in that initial conversation where they were told, don't create your own system out of this data feed. We want you to push out the North Carolina state system. And we did. We tried to do that for a few years until we realized that it just was not meeting our community's needs. And that's where having Code for Asheville step in has been really essential to, I think, helping to move this work forward. And I think that the county, I can speak for our department, is ready to really try to roll this out and is happy to take this on as more of a official county offering. And we do have, I know Eric has connected with someone from the UNC School of Government who is a leader in the state around many justice system reforms. And she's working on supporting a number of different county groups that are trying to implement best practices around reducing failures to appear in court. And so I think we're hoping we can prove this out and make it work locally. And I know this is going public. We still haven't asked for full approval from anyone else outside of our county. So we're hoping we can really show some success before that question is raised by other folks. But I think that what Code for Asheville has built has the capacity, is right now has a filter on it for just Buncombe cases. But from my understanding, Eric, you guys have built it in a way where it could be opened up to other counties across the state if we can kind of show it as a success here.
Yes. And so there's a bunch of good questions coming in that I want to get. First, one was sharing this. I mean, we're telling you about it now. I just threw a link to the project in GitHub, and we've definitely shared this. We have a North Carolina kind of Code for North Carolina. I forget exactly what it's called, where we've shared this. One of the advantages, because we're pulling information from the state site, the system itself can be used for any county in the state. There's no problem. And just a little bit of customization. There's more work because every county has its own processes, and so you need to change some of the messaging, because we're saying, here's where this court, show up here for this courtroom or that courtroom, and that may be different in other counties. I want to pull out a couple of other things. But as far as sharing with other communities, I have talked with a few people, as Hannah said, and I've got a couple people still to reach out to. The technical, as is so often the case, the technical problem is the easy one. The hard part is getting the people in the system to actually use it, not as here's this cool thing you can use, but what I would love to see is that eventually it goes from an opt-in system to an opt-out system. In the end, that's the best way to do it, is you're signed up for this, you can opt out, but you don't have to go to any effort to get signed up. And we're nowhere near that. I do want to kind of call out Allison's point that smaller systems are and can be driven by individual actors within the system. I mean, that's particularly true with judges. Judges they're not in charge. I wish some of them were in charge. But they do have a lot of power for everything happening for the cases that are in front of them. But I think more generally, governments, I mean, particularly in a smaller one, I mean, Buncombe County is not that big, and the city of Asheville is even smaller. Governments are just a bunch of people, and they're a bunch of people who are very different, and you can usually find people who will be good partners, even if the government as a whole isn't going to be particularly cooperative. I think it's the inside of City Hall, the inside of county government is a very complicated beast. It's a big organization with lots of different moving parts and lots of different people. And you can often find great partners. And it's good if you can find a good partner, do something that sort of proves the value before you go and try and get the city manager or the county manager or the elected board to do something. What was the...
There was a question about results yet of data, being able to use the data to see if the system is making an impact on appearance rates for those who get notifications versus those who don't. We don't have that capacity yet. I think that Eric is working with our data analyst to try to get to that point. Is that right?
Yes. Early on, I set up a couple of special views in the data for the county to pull. They can't get, phone numbers are encrypted anyway, but they don't include access to phone numbers or anything like that. But they are now starting to look and see if they can correlate that with appearance rates. That's going to be a longer term thing, just because if you've ever been unlucky enough to be involved with the justice system, things take a really long time. And so really seeing impact, we need to get the numbers up and we need to play it out over time.
And one nuance of North Carolina courts I don't think we've mentioned is that everything is primarily still in the courthouse done on paper. There is a plan to move to e-courts that is, I think Buncombe County is expected to get it somewhere between 3 to 5 years from now. So a lot of what happens in the courtrooms is still done on paper, if not almost everything.
Yeah, it's sort of amazing, actually. Okay, we have a question. You mentioned it was challenging for different government departments to agree to share data with each other. Why is that? I think that was particularly, for example, within the city of Asheville, for the most part, that's not what happens. That was the city of Philadelphia, which is much bigger. But also, I think there's been, Mark Head was chief data officer in Philly 15 years ago, more than 10 anyway. And I think there has been a lot of learning since then, so that story might not play out quite the same way in a lot of places today as it did 10, 15 years ago. But if you go back to that slide, when you have lots of essentially independent actors, getting them to agree to do things together without even, there's people making sure that they're protecting their own agency and independence, and that is a big deal in the court system. But also, you're trying to run your organization and do all the things that you're charged with doing, and you don't have a ton of time to go out and collaborate and everything else unless it really advances your interests. I think that's another reason why often it's not that people don't want to collaborate, it's that they are so overburdened that they just can't afford to.
We do have buy-in from public defenders, yes, but I think a lot of public defenders are signing their clients up individually. We have talked about having, trying to find one office where people can, there's somebody on deck to sign people up. And we don't have that systematized in the public defender's office yet.
They're exploring, I think there are two interesting, we're looking at all the interesting places where we can hook in. The public defender's office is doing some work with first appearances. Mm-hmm. And right now they can't go into the jail, again, pandemic related, for first appearances. As they get back there, just being able to sign people up or hand them cards or whatever. People exiting jail, like that's a great time. But also you want to think about all the people who, even though this is designed, the reason we did it was to try and reduce population in the jail. Lots of people, it happens downstream, and they don't get arrested and go to jail. They get charged, and they don't necessarily do a good job of keeping up track of their court dates. So how do we actually get that information to them if the first time they really show up in the system is when they're supposed to show up for court, and they fail to show up for court, like, we needed to get in there before.
And as far as signing them up at the jail, there's technically at the point of entry into the jail, their data isn't in the system yet to pull it. And then when they leave the jail, we don't know yet if they're going to leave later that night, if they're going to be released immediately, if they're going to, be bailed out the next day, or if they'll be in there for a longer amount of time. And we've explored with the sheriff's office staff about whether there would be a way to have them signed up within the jail if they are staying longer, but there's some complexities about that. So it's at the moment, it has not become one of the primary points to make sure that everyone would get access to signing it up in a way that would work for them. Kelsey, we chose FTAs as one of our primary focuses because it is a driver both in our overall jail population and in inequities in our jail population. And it's one that we feel like could be reduced. And this is, and court reminders are one of the ways that communities across the country have effectively reduced FTAs by up to 25%. I'm curious, Eric, if you had a magic wand to make bottlenecks go away.
The number of things that I want to fix. There are a lot of issues. I think the biggest, so for this piece, I think the real challenge in the system is that nobody is in charge. And it shows in the decision making around something like court reminder systems, but it shows in lots of other places as well. I mean, I think there are inefficiencies in the system. I don't know that Hannah is the person to say such things, but I listen to this every single night. There is an amazing amount of inefficiency in the system simply because what happens very often is dependent on what a particular judge in a particular courtroom decides to do and how they decide to do it. And so there isn't, I think, if I had a magic wand, I would have some sort of steering group or something that had the power to, while preserving everyone's independence and agency, was able to say it serves everyone better for us not to waste time sitting around in courtrooms waiting for cases to be continued where everybody knows in advance they're just going to be continued, that sort of thing. I think it would be some sort of coordination and buy-in around, let's be coordinated. I think for the bigger changes, that's not inside the system. That's got to be from outside the system. That's got to be that public support for better ways of thinking about justice and what its purpose is, and what kind of systems we put in place. Let's see, what other questions? Interestingly, I mean, Jay said the sheriff has pledged to make text reminders systematic. One of my questions is how much power, given the balkanization of the system, how much power any sheriff has because maybe for everybody who's coming out of the jail, because the sheriff's department oversees the jail, but for everybody else, they may be arrested by the Asheville Police Department instead of the Sheriff's Department. Like, it's challenging. So can you focus on those judges that have bought into the program? I mean, we do, but in some sense, like, we don't have to worry about them. I think part of my vision is if we can start to show positive impact, we need to be able to go in when we're talking to a judge, we need to be able to have a message that tells the judge why they care. And that shouldn't be that hard, because judges hate people who don't show up for court. And so I think it is in their interest. You're going to have a different message for folks who are maintaining the jail. For them, maybe it's much more about keeping the population in the jail under control, so that, because I know they've been bumping up against their limits, and that creates a lot of problems. So, have we missed a question? If we have, go ahead and repeat it.
I know we've gotten our indicator. We're running short on time, or running to the close of our time.
How have other elected officials played into your work? They haven't. I mean, I'm happy to have support from them, but we've essentially done this internally with a lot of support. And I really want to call Hannah out for helping facilitate all the conversations that made this really possible.
I will say we've had buy-in and support from members of our district attorney's office.
Yep.
And Alejandra, yes, I think given all the nuances of who in the justice system process has access to everybody who's coming through at a point when a case number has been created for them. If like targeting folks who would be in that position and having them have an easy way to automatically sign people up is an ideal solution. And there are some places that have figured out how to do that. Our department doesn't have access to everybody coming through the court system, and the folks who do, it needs to be, I think that the system that Code for Asheville has been able to build is so much simpler that I think it might be something we could revisit to some of those other court partners to see if we could increase the buy-in for that to be something additional that their staff take on.
So quickly, a couple things, Alejandra. Hopefully we can find a way of automatically signing people up. That would be great. We have elected officials policy. There are a county, a city, an elected sheriff. Like, there's a lot of different jurisdictions here, which is part of what makes it really complicated. It is interesting to look at if people, so this is easy to do on your phone, but you have to obviously have a smartphone. That's pretty common, but we could take this, we haven't done it because we have not seen the demonstrated need yet, but we could take this to a text only sort of interface so that it doesn't even require a smartphone. That's it's not hard to implement. It's hard to do a usable interface that's text only, but we could do that if we see evidence that there's a need. And I think somebody asked about how much time was spent maintaining. Very little. We've been getting by on a 1 day a month work session, and then I do bits and pieces in between. All right, I think we're past the top of the hour. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I hope it was useful. I'm not sure if it was exactly as advertised, but we wrote that long before we thought of what we were actually presenting. But
thanks, y'all.
And feel free, I will just put this up again. Feel free to reach out to either of us at any point. Happy to answer more questions or talk or whatever else.